September 21st, 1918. Damascus Road, 15 miles north of Jenin, Palestine. Major George Nutt of the British Light Armored Motor Battery watched through dust-caked goggles as another column of Ottoman soldiers threw down their rifles and raised their hands. His Rolls-Royce armored car, engine still running hot from 70 miles of pursuit, had just overtaken the rear guard of the Turkish 7th Army. In the past 18 hours, Nutt's three-car section had captured over 2,000 retreating Ottoman troops, more prisoners than an entire cavalry regiment typically took in a week of operations. The Ottoman soldiers, exhausted from 3 days of retreat, stared in confusion at these steel-plated automobiles that had somehow caught them. Behind Nutt, 2 more light armored motor battery sections were racing northward, their commanders reporting similar hauls by wireless. What Major Nutt couldn't know, what no British officer would fully comprehend until the campaign's conclusion, was that 12 armored cars operating across Palestine's road network were in the process of capturing more than 8,000 Ottoman soldiers in 72 hours, a prisoner harvest that traditional cavalry pursuit, despite deploying thousands of horsemen, could never have matched. The armored car, dismissed by Ottoman and German commanders as a weapon of limited tactical value, was proving to be the decisive exploitation tool of mobile warfare, capable of pursuing broken armies faster and farther than any horse-mounted force in military history. The Ottoman General Staff's assessment of armored cars reflected conventional military wisdom developed from 3 years of Middle Eastern warfare. In 1915, when British armored car units first appeared in Egypt and Mesopotamia, Ottoman commanders observed their obvious limitations: poor cross-country mobility, mechanical unreliability, vulnerability to terrain obstacles, and dependence on roads that could be easily blocked or destroyed. The British themselves seemed to confirm these judgments through repeated tactical failures. In Mesopotamia during 1916, armored car units had proven useless during General Townshend's advance toward Baghdad, breaking down in the desert or becoming mired in mud near the Tigris River. Turkish defensive positions, carefully sited away from roads and in broken terrain, had rendered the vehicles impotent. German military advisors to the Ottoman army, particularly those from the Asian Corps, reported that armored cars represented a technological curiosity rather than a serious battlefield threat, useful perhaps for reconnaissance or supply escort, but incapable of decisive action against prepared defenses or in pursuit operations where traditional cavalry excelled. The Turkish Army's 1917 field manual, revised with German assistance, devoted exactly 3 paragraphs to countering armored vehicles. The manual noted that motor cars, even when armored, cannot operate away from prepared roads, and recommended that destroying bridges and creating obstacles on roads will prevent their employment. Ottoman defensive doctrine, as practiced in Palestine throughout 1917 and early 1918, positioned defensive lines across terrain that channeled any mechanized advance into killing zones where artillery could destroy vehicles unable to maneuver off-road. This assessment seemed validated by combat experience. At the First Battle of Gaza in March 1917, British armored cars had achieved nothing, unable to cross the soft sand and broken ground that characterized the coastal approaches. During the Second Battle of Gaza in April 1917, Ottoman artillery had destroyed 2 armored cars that attempted to operate on the coastal road, confirming Turkish beliefs about the vehicle's vulnerability. Even General Allenby's successful Third Battle of Gaza in October 1917 saw armored cars play minimal roles, with traditional cavalry, the Australian Light Horse, and Indian cavalry brigades, providing the decisive pursuit force that drove Ottoman armies from Gaza to Jerusalem. To Ottoman commanders, the pattern was clear. Armored cars were road-bound, mechanically fragile, and tactically insignificant compared to cavalry, which could operate across all terrain and sustain multi-day pursuits. What Ottoman generals didn't know, what their intelligence assessments failed to detect, was that British automotive engineers had spent 2 years solving the mechanical and tactical problems that had initially limited armored car effectiveness. The transformation began not in military arsenals but in the workshops of Rolls-Royce Limited in Derby, England, where Claude Johnson and Henry Royce had turned their luxury automobile company toward war production. The original Rolls-Royce armored cars of 1914 to 1915 had been simply silver ghost chassis fitted with armor plate, creating vehicles too heavy for their engines and prone to mechanical failure in harsh conditions. By 1916, Royce's engineering team had redesigned the entire vehicle around the demands of desert warfare. The Rolls-Royce armored car, pattern 1920, developed in 1917, featured a strengthened chassis specifically designed to handle armor weight, a modified 40 to 50 horsepower engine tuned for sustained high-speed operation in extreme heat, enlarged radiators with improved cooling capacity, and a rear-mounted .303 Vickers machine gun and an armored turret providing 360-degree traverse. The breakthrough came not just in mechanical engineering, but in tactical doctrine developed by Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Rolls of the Machine Gun Corps, Motors, who commanded British armored car operations in Egypt from 1916 onward. Rolls recognized that armored cars' road dependence wasn't a fatal flaw, but a tactical characteristic that could be exploited given proper conditions. His 1917 memorandum, Employment of Light Armored Motor Batteries in Pursuit Operations, outlined a doctrine that Ottoman intelligence never captured. Armored cars should not assault prepared positions, but should instead exploit breakthroughs created by conventional forces, racing through gaps to pursue retreating enemies along their inevitable withdrawal routes. The roads. Rolls calculated that a Rolls-Royce armored car could sustain 40 miles per hour on decent roads, covering in 2 hours what cavalry required 12 hours to traverse. More critically, armored cars could operate continuously for 24 to 48 hours without rest, while cavalry required regular halts for horse care, water, and fodder. The tactical mathematics were compelling. In pursuit operations after a breakthrough, properly employed armored cars could overtake retreating infantry columns before they reached defensive positions, capturing intact units faster than they could reorganize. The industrial capacity that made this doctrine viable existed at scales Ottoman planners never imagined. Rolls-Royce Limited, which had produced 485 Silver Ghost automobiles in 1913, retooled its Derby works for armored car production in 1915. By 1917, the Derby plant employed 6,200 workers, including 2,400 women, replacing men sent to France, producing armored cars at a rate of 12 vehicles per month. The pattern 1920 armored car cost £4,200 to manufacture, compared to £180 for equipping and training a cavalry trooper, making 12 armored cars roughly equivalent in cost to 280 cavalrymen, yet capable of pursuing faster and farther than an entire cavalry regiment of 600 horses. Vickers Limited at Crayford produced the .303 Vickers machine guns, manufacturing 120 guns per week by 1918. The Austin Motor Company at Longbridge simultaneously produced lighter Austin armored cars for reconnaissance, employing 3,800 workers building 30 vehicles monthly. By September 1918, British forces in Palestine possessed 48 Rolls-Royce armored cars organized in 12 light armored motor battery sections, plus additional Austin armored cars for scouting, a mechanized pursuit force whose operational capacity exceeded anything possible with cavalry alone. The Battle of Megiddo, beginning September 19, 1918, created the exact conditions for which Colonel Rolls had designed his armored car doctrine. General Edmund Allenby's meticulously planned offensive struck the junction between the Ottoman 8th and 7th Armies at 4:30 a.m., with a 30-minute artillery bombardment from 383, guns firing 1,000 shells per minute, a concentration that shattered Turkish defensive positions along a 15-mile front. The British 21st Corps Infantry Divisions, the 3rd Indian Division, 7th Indian Division, 54th Division, 60th Division, and 75th Division advanced through the gap created by this bombardment, breaking through Ottoman lines by 7:00 a.m. Behind the infantry, the Desert Mounted Corps, Australian Mounted Division, 4th Cavalry Division, 5th Cavalry Division, poured through the breach, beginning the traditional cavalry pursuit that British doctrine prescribed. But alongside the cavalry, the 12 armored car sections of the Light Armored Motor Battery also advanced, their commanders carrying Colonel Rolls' operational orders. Ignore the fleeing Ottoman units in open terrain where cavalry could operate, instead race for the road network that retreating Turkish armies would inevitably use. Major George Nutt's No. 11 Light Armored Motor Battery Section, consisting of 3 Rolls-Royce armored cars, entered the breakthrough gap at 10:30 a.m. on September 19th, 3 hours after the cavalry's initial pursuit began. Nutt's orders directed him northward along the main Damascus road toward Jenin, a critical junction where Ottoman retreat routes converged. The 3 armored cars, each carrying a driver, commander, and 2 gunners, plus 4 days' rations and 5,000 rounds of .303 ammunition, averaged 35 miles per hour on the dusty road, overtaking disordered Ottoman rearguard units too quickly for the Turkish soldiers to organize resistance. By 4:00 p.m., Nutt's section had covered 40 miles, reaching the approaches to Jenin, where they encountered the rear elements of the Turkish 7th Army's supply column. The Ottoman troops, believing themselves safely ahead of British pursuit, had halted to rest. When Nutt's armored cars appeared, traveling at speeds no cavalry could match, the Ottoman soldiers' confusion was total. The armored cars' Vickers machine guns, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, provided firepower equivalent to an entire infantry company, making resistance suicidal. Within 30 minutes, Nutt's 3 armored cars had captured 400 Ottoman soldiers, disarmed them, and directed them to walk south toward British lines, while the armored cars continued their pursuit northward. What made September 20th and 21st decisive was the systematic deployment of all 12 light armored motor battery sections across Palestine's road network. While Major Nutt's section pursued north along the Damascus Road, Major Robert Cruikshank's No. 12 section raced northeast toward Nablus. Captain Herbert Young's No. 7 section advanced along the Jordan Valley Road, and Captain William Watson's No. 2 section headed for the coastal road toward Haifa. Each section operated independently, using wireless telegraph to report positions and prisoner counts to Colonel Rolls's headquarters, which coordinated their movements to cut off every Ottoman retreat route. By the afternoon of September 20th, the pattern was clear. Ottoman units retreating along roads encountered armored cars that had somehow arrived ahead of them, while retreating across open terrain meant falling into pursuing cavalry. The Turkish 7th Army, attempting to withdraw northeast toward Damascus, found its retreat routes systematically blocked by armored car sections that had covered 70 miles in 2 days, a pace no cavalry force could sustain. The tactical mathematics of armored car pursuit proved devastating. A Rolls-Royce armored car section of 3 vehicles, operating continuously with drivers rotating at rest stops, could cover 120 miles in 24 hours on decent roads. The desert-mounted corps cavalry, moving at cavalry pace with regular halts for horse care, covered at most 35 miles per day in sustained pursuit. This velocity differential meant armored cars reached Ottoman withdrawal destinations before retreating Turkish units arrived. On September 21st, Major Nutt's section reached the Damascus road crossing at Beisan, 65 miles from their starting point, 6 hours before the leading elements of the Turkish 7th Army's retreat column. When Ottoman troops arrived, exhausted from 3 days of retreat and believing they had outdistanced British pursuit, they found 3 Rolls-Royce armored cars positioned across the road, machine guns trained on the approaching column. The Ottoman regimental commander, Colonel Mehmet Shefik, later described his unit's surrender. We had marched for 70 hours, covering 50 kilometers, certain we had escaped the British cavalry. When we saw the armored cars, which should have been impossible at this location, our soldiers simply sat down. We had no strength to fight, and these machines had clearly traveled faster than we could march. The prisoner harvest across September 19th to 22nd revealed armored cars' decisive advantage in exploitation operations. Major Nutt's No. 11 section alone captured 2,147 Ottoman soldiers during 72 hours of operations, averaging 1 prisoner per mile traveled. Major Cruikshank's No. 12 section took 1,890 prisoners on the Nablus Road. Captain Young's No. 7 section captured 1,654 Ottoman troops in the Jordan Valley. The remaining 9 sections reported similar totals. By September 23rd, when General Allenby's headquarters compiled preliminary casualty reports, the 12 light armored motor battery sections had captured more than 8,000 Ottoman soldiers, roughly 1/3 of all prisoners taken during the Megiddo offensive's initial phase. The Desert Mounted Corps Cavalry, deploying 12,000 horsemen across 3 divisions, captured approximately 17,000 prisoners during the same period, a more impressive total, but achieved with a force 20 times larger than the armored car contingent. The efficiency ratio was striking. Each armored car crewman, 4 men per vehicle, 48 vehicles total, captured an average of 42 Ottoman soldiers, while each cavalryman captured an average of 1.4 prisoners. The armored car's combination of speed, firepower, and mechanical endurance had proven 30 times more effective at prisoner capture than traditional cavalry. The total destruction of the Ottoman armies at Megiddo revealed the strategic consequences of effective pursuit. The Turkish 7th Army, numbering 14,000 men at the battle's opening, ceased to exist as an organized force by September 25th. Of its original strength, 8,000 were captured, 3,000 were killed or wounded, and only 3,000 escaped as scattered fugitives who eventually regrouped near Damascus. The 8th Army, initially 12,000 strong, suffered similar destruction: 7,000 captured, 2,500 casualties, 2,500 escaped. Ottoman records compiled after the war identified armored car pursuit as the decisive factor preventing organized withdrawal. Turkish staff officer Major Bekir Sami, in his 1920 analysis of the Megiddo defeat, wrote, "The British cavalry we expected and could have delayed through rearguard actions at defiles and river crossings. The armored motor cars we did not expect and could not stop. They moved faster than our retreating columns, appeared at locations we believed safe, and captured entire battalions before officers could organize defense. Our assumption that motor cars were road-bound proved correct, but in retreat, armies are also road-bound. The British exploited this matching constraint to decisive effect." The campaign's later phases confirmed armored cars' pursuit superiority. On September 26th, light armored motor battery sections reached Damascus, 120 miles from their Megiddo starting positions. Having captured an additional 4,000 Ottoman stragglers during the advance, Australian cavalry, following the same route, arrived 36 hours later, their horses exhausted from sustained pursuit. On October 1st, armored car sections reached Aleppo, 250 miles from Megiddo, overtaking the remnants of the Ottoman 4th Army attempting withdrawal toward Turkey. By October 26th, when the Ottoman Empire signed the Armistice of Mudros, British armored cars had pursued retreating Turkish forces for 400 miles in 37 days, an operational tempo impossible for cavalry and inconceivable in European trench warfare. The contrast with Western Front operations was absolute. In France, where roads were cratered by artillery and terrain was devastated by years of combat, armored cars remained tactically marginal, unable to operate effectively in the battlefield chaos. In Palestine, where roads remained intact and terrain was open, armored cars proved to be the war's most effective pursuit weapon, validating Colonel Rolls' doctrine that mobility and mechanical endurance could overcome cavalry's traditional advantages. The recognition arc for armored car doctrine followed a pattern familiar throughout the Great War: pre-war confidence in traditional methods, early war technological failure, mid-war engineering solutions, late war tactical validation, and post-war doctrinal revolution. In 1914, British cavalry doctrine, codified in the 1912 Cavalry Training Manual, described pursuit as cavalry's supreme function. Cavalry alone can complete the enemy's defeat by vigorous pursuit. The manual devoted 80 pages to pursuit tactics, emphasizing that cavalry's speed and endurance made it irreplaceable for exploitation operations. Armored cars, introduced experimentally in 1914, were categorized as reconnaissance vehicles, useful for scouting but incapable of decisive action. By 1915, after armored cars' mechanical failures in Mesopotamia and Egypt, this assessment seemed confirmed. The 1915 Machine Gun Corps Motors Training Manual acknowledged that armored motor cars are limited to road operations and cannot pursue across country like cavalry. The transformation began in 1916, when British engineers addressed armored cars' mechanical limitations through systematic redesign. The 1917 Notes on Light Armored Motor Battery Operations reflected evolving understanding. Armored cars cannot replace cavalry, but can complement cavalry by exploiting roads for rapid pursuit. By early 1918, doctrine shifted toward recognizing armored cars' unique capabilities. Colonel Rolls' March 1918 memorandum, Mechanized Pursuit in Open Warfare, proposed that armored cars, properly employed in breakthrough exploitation, can achieve pursuit results superior to cavalry. This represented doctrinal heresy, suggesting machines might outperform horses in mobile warfare, but Rolls presented compelling mathematics. A cavalry division required 10,000 horses consuming 200,000 pounds of fodder daily, moving at 4 to 5 miles per hour, covering at most 35 miles per day. An equivalent armored car force of 48 vehicles required only 960 gallons of petrol daily, moved at 35 to 40 miles per hour, and could cover 120 miles per day. The logistics alone suggested armored cars' advantages. The Battle of Megiddo provided the proof that transformed British doctrine from cavalry-centric to mechanization-aware. On September 30th, 1918, General Allenby submitted his preliminary report on the Megiddo operations to the War Office, noting, "The employment of light armored motor batteries in pursuit proved decisive. These units captured 1/3 of all prisoners taken, operated at distances and speeds cavalry could not match, and decisively prevented enemy withdrawal. Future doctrine must incorporate mechanized pursuit as equal to, if not superior to, cavalry in exploitation operations." This assessment, coming from a cavalry officer commanding a cavalry-heavy force, represented a fundamental recognition that the Great War's technological transformations extended beyond the Western Front's trenches to mobile warfare in open terrain. The War Office's 1919 Provisional Instructions for Tank and Armored Car Training codified this new understanding, stating, "In pursuit operations following breakthrough, armored cars operating on roads can achieve results in prisoner capture and enemy disorganization that exceed traditional cavalry capabilities." The post-war memoirs revealed the psychological impact of armored car pursuit on Ottoman soldiers. Private Mehmet Ali of the Turkish 7th Army's 19th Division described surrender to armored cars near Jenin. "We had walked for 3 days, perhaps 80 kilometers, sleeping only when we could no longer walk. When we saw the British armored cars on the road ahead, we knew escape was impossible. These machines could travel in 1 hour what required us 1 day. Fighting was pointless. They had machine guns we could not approach. We put down our rifles and waited for capture. Many soldiers said it was shameful to surrender to machines rather than soldiers. But what choice did we have? The cars could kill us all in minutes." This testimony captured armored cars' psychological force, the mechanical inevitability of overtaking retreating infantry, the firepower that made resistance suicidal, and the recognition that industrial mobility had created a new form of warfare where machines hunted men faster than men could flee. German military analysts studying the Megiddo campaign in 1919 recognized the broader implications for future warfare. Major General Hans von Seeckt, who would reshape the Reichswehr in the 1920s, wrote in his analysis, "Lessons from Turkey's Defeat." The British employment of armored motor cars at Megiddo demonstrates that mechanical mobility, properly exploited, surpasses cavalry in pursuit operations. The internal combustion engine provides speed and endurance that horseflesh cannot match. Future armies must incorporate mechanized units not as auxiliary forces but as primary exploitation weapons. The age of cavalry as the decisive arm is ending. The age of mechanized warfare has begun. Von Seeckt's recognition proved prescient. Within 20 years, German armies would employ mechanized forces on scales that made Megiddo's 12 armored cars seem primitive, validating the doctrinal revolution that began in Palestine's pursuit operations. The tactical lessons transcended the Middle Eastern theater. British armored car doctrine, validated at Megiddo, influenced interwar mechanization debates throughout the 1920s and 1930s. The Royal Tank Corps, established in 1923, studied light armored motor battery operations as models for mechanized pursuit. Major General J.F.C. Fuller's influential 1923 treatise, The Reformation of War, cited Megiddo's armored car operations as proof that mechanical mobility must replace animal mobility in modern warfare. Fuller calculated that Britain's 1918 cavalry forces approximately 50,000 horses in service, required 1 million pounds of fodder daily, and could cover at most 35 miles per day. An equivalent mechanized force would require only 10,000 gallons of petrol daily, deliverable by motor transport, and could cover 150 miles per day. The logistics favored mechanization absolutely, as Megiddo had demonstrated operationally. The contrast with cavalry's Megiddo performance, while favoring armored cars in efficiency, didn't diminish cavalry's continued tactical relevance. The desert-mounted corps cavalry captured 17,000 Ottoman prisoners during the campaign, more than twice the armored cars' total. Because cavalry could operate across terrain where armored cars couldn't venture and could sustain pursuit for weeks, while armored cars required periodic maintenance. The recognition wasn't that cavalry had become obsolete, but that mechanization offered superior performance in specific conditions: road networks, sustained high-speed pursuit, and operations where mechanical endurance exceeded horse endurance. Major General George Barrow, commanding the Desert Mounted Corps, acknowledged this in his post-campaign report. Light armored motor batteries proved invaluable in pursuit along roads, capturing prisoners at rates cavalry could not match. However, cavalry remained essential for cross-country operations and for holding captured ground. The future force requires both arms, each employed according to terrain and tactical requirements. The Ottoman recognition of their armored car assessment's failure came too late to affect the war's outcome, but profoundly influenced Turkish military modernization. The Turkish Republic's army, reorganized in the 1920s under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, prioritized mechanization based on Megiddo's lessons. The 1924 Turkish Army Field Manual devoted entire sections to countering mechanized pursuit, emphasizing demolition of roads, establishment of anti-vehicle obstacles, and dispersed retreat patterns that avoided road networks. More significantly, Turkey purchased armored cars from Britain and France during the 1920s, building mechanized reconnaissance units based on the vehicles that had devastated Ottoman armies in 1918. Former Ottoman staff officer Colonel İsmet İnönü, later Prime Minister of Turkey, wrote in his 1926 military analysis, "At Megiddo, we learned that modern armies cannot ignore mechanical warfare. The motor car's mobility exceeded our cavalry's capability to scout or our infantry's ability to retreat. Turkey's new army must embrace mechanization or face defeat by enemies who have mastered these technologies." The technological legacy extended beyond military doctrine to automotive engineering. Rolls-Royce's armored car experience in desert warfare informed the company's post-war vehicle designs, particularly improved cooling systems and strengthened chassis that became standard features in commercial vehicles. The Pattern 1920 armored car, developed for Megiddo operations, served as the template for British armored cars through the 1920s and influenced early tank design. Vickers Armstrong, which produced both Vickers machine guns and armored vehicles, leveraged its armored car experience to develop light tanks in the 1930s. The industrial expertise developed for producing 48 Rolls-Royce armored cars in 1918 scaled dramatically by 1939. When British factories could produce hundreds of armored vehicles monthly, industrial capacity rooted in the Great War's mechanical warfare innovations. The broader recognition that mechanization could surpass cavalry in mobile warfare represented one of the Great War's most consequential doctrinal transformations. Ottoman dismissal of armored cars as tactically insignificant reflected conventional military wisdom that proved catastrophically wrong when industrial mobility met the specific conditions: intact roads, open terrain, retreating enemies that allowed mechanical advantages to overwhelm traditional methods. The 12 Rolls-Royce armored cars that captured 8,000 Ottoman soldiers in 72 hours demonstrated that future warfare would increasingly favor machines over horses, internal combustion over muscle power, and mechanical endurance over animal limitations. This recognition, forced on military establishments by battlefield results that contradicted decades of cavalry-centric doctrine, marked the beginning of mechanized warfare's dominance, a transformation that would reach full expression in the next war, where armored vehicles would prove decisive not just in pursuit, but in breakthrough, exploitation, and mobile operations at operational scales. Megiddo's armored car pursuit, dismissed by Ottoman generals as an impossible threat from weapons they considered toys, proved to be a harbinger of warfare's mechanical future, where speed and industrial endurance would replace tradition and animal mobility as the foundations of military power.